For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Mutsabi Hwayani. Political analyst Aubrey Machikwi joins me to discuss Zimbabwe's July 31st elections, which were fraught with concerns over alleged vote rigging and fraud. Do you think the timing of the recent Zimbabwe elections impacted on the election results, particularly as the opposition parties wanted the elections to be postponed?
I have no doubt it did, because after the 2008 elections, the Zanu-PF party did certain things to make sure that the next election, which was last month's election, would take place under conditions, firstly, of their own choosing, and secondly, conditions advantageous to them. And they did several things. The first thing they needed to do, and they did, I think, successfully, was to disrupt the MTC on the ground. The second thing was to make sure that the leadership of MTC becomes distant from the rank and file and support base of the MTC. So they used the global political agreement as a spider's web to ensnare the leadership of the MTC. In fact, a few days ago, the Harare Provincial Council of the MTC had a meeting about whether those who have won seats should participate in the election. Now, to show how juice and gravy can be in the context of government, that provincial council decided, and supported by Tsvangirai, that those who won seats would participate because the alternative would have been a split. Now that takes you back to 2008. That not only was the MTC at leadership level locked into a coalition arrangement at the expense of his processes on the ground, but those who had won seats in Parliament wanted to taste the juice and the gravy. But I think the most important thing that Zanu-PF wanted to do was to reconnect with its rural support base, because in 2008 the MTC had penetrated that rural base, but Zanu-PF in turn had failed to penetrate the MTC's urban base. All these factors, combined with the weak and poor strategic choices of both Tsvangirai and the MTC, plus the fact that this election was held too soon, all these factors were to the advantage of Zanu-PF.
You point out a number of weaknesses in the manner in which the key opposition leader, Tsvangirai, approached the elections. What is your main criticism of Tsvangirai?
My main criticism is this. It was very clear that Zanu-PF insisted on the 31 July election date, knowing that the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission would not be ready. But more importantly, knowing that an administratively flawed election can have the same effect as an election that is not free and fair. Knowing all of that, one would have thought the MTC would have insisted on an extension and would therefore not have accepted the 31 July election date. But I think they decided to participate because they thought the story now would be MTC wins election despite constraints. And of course, that is not what happened.
Both rivals, President Robert Mugabe and Tsvangirai, alluded to the will of the people. Do you think the recent election results express the will of the Zimbabwean people?
Well, the question is whether Zanu-PF created conditions that were conducive to the will of the people being the dominant feature of the electoral process. Now, if you hold an election too soon, when the electoral authorities are not ready, if you hold an election under conditions that are advantageous to only one party, or mainly to one party, you cannot claim that you have created conditions in which ordinary citizens can express their will. So no, I don't think this election conduced to us understanding what the real will of the Zimbabwean people is.
In relation to their monitoring of the Zimbabwean election, you suggest that the African Union and the South African Development Communities Authority has been emasculated. Why do you say this, and how can these bodies regain their status?
Well, I suggest that they need political Viagra. And it's not the first time that one feels the African Union and SADC, under these circumstances, need political Viagra. But in this case, what happened, unfortunately, is that the African Union in particular painted itself into a corner. The moment its head, Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, went to Zimbabwe and proclaimed that the elections were unproblematic, administratively things were good, and that she was satisfied with the preparations, there is no other proclamation other than endorsing the election result that the African Union would have made. Now, of course, as ambiguous as the report itself is, what Zanu-PF will take out of the AU Observer Mission report is the fact that nonetheless the AU has endorsed the election result, and of course SADC too.
Do you think South Africa's President Jacob Zuma was over-hasty in congratulating President Robert Mugabe on his election victory?
Well, he was not going to contradict the African Union and SADC. And more importantly, he is a SADC mediator and was therefore not going to contradict the position taken by SADC. But the position remains unfortunate. But we must still ask questions about whether the extent to which external actors can influence what goes on inside Zimbabwe is limited or not. Because my assessment of Mugabe and Zanu-PF is that they are impervious to external opinion. There is very little that external actors can say or do to change their minds. And given the fact that they have the might of the Zimbabwean state behind them, given the balance of forces in the African Union and SADC combined, the balance of forces is still such that these continental and regional bodies will err on the side of caution, and erring on the side of caution benefits Zanu-PF.
Lastly, do you think that African countries and the wider international community has a role to play in securing democracy in Zimbabwe, and what interventions might work?
Well, the primary responsibility of securing democracy in Zimbabwe is that of Zimbabweans themselves. All of us, the rest of the world and the African continent, must come in as external helpers who assist, who help Zimbabweans achieve their democratic goals.
That was political analyst Aubrey Machikwi discussing the challenges surrounding Zimbabwe's elections and the resultant outcomes.